Hey guys, tonight we drift straight into the kind of ocean story that sneaks up on you the way a rogue wave does. Soft at first, then suddenly you're knee-deep in a world where captains wear questionable hats, ships groan like old porch floors, and somehow there's always a parrot involved. And look, if you ever found yourself magically teleported onto a pirate deck in the early 1700s, I'm just going to be honest with you. You might not survive the first day. Not because of sword fights or cannonballs, but because the sunburn alone would humble you. But that's okay. Tonight, you're safe. You're tucked in. And all you have to do is follow the gentle sway of this story, like you're being rocked by the world's most historically inaccurate hammock. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, adjust to a comfortable sleeping position, and let's begin our journey tonight in a relaxed and pleasant way. You feel the deck tilt beneath your feet. Don't worry, that's just your imagination, kindly reminding you that the ocean is a moody roommate. As you step forward, the air smells like wet rope, spilled rum, and that particular sea salt freshness that makes you think of postcards and unrealistic vacation expectations. And right there, next to the ship's wheel, is the thing you've seen 1,000 times in cartoons, Halloween costumes, and aggressively themed restaurants. A pirate captain with a parrot perched on his shoulder. The funny thing? Your brain accepts it instantly. Of course there's a bird. Of course it's bright green with a beak sharp enough to cut your weekly grocery budget in half. And of course the captain looks like the kind of guy who would talk to animals long before he talks to people. That image is so deeply baked into your mind that it feels ancient. Like some historian once wrote, every captain must have a parrot, preferably sassy. But the truth behind this iconic pairing, that's where the story actually starts to get interesting. Because when you squint past the stereotypes, past the pop culture memorabilia aisle of your memory, you realize something. Real pirates weren't walking around with birds just because it looked cool on a t-shirt. These parrots had history, geography, economics, a whole mess of colonial oddities baked into their feathers. You're not just looking at a bird, you're looking at a living souvenir from distant tropics, a symbol that a captain had been places. And in the world of pirates, places usually meant ports. You and I can only afford to visit by clicking blue hyperlinks we're told not to click. So you lean on the railing. Careful, it's sticky for reasons you don't want to think about. And watch the captain shift slightly. The parrot adjusts along with him, like it has tenure on that shoulder. You can't help but wonder how this unlikely duo even became a duo. It's not like parrots naturally gravitate toward loud humans who survive entirely on questionable rum and dental neglect. Here's the first little historical truth that floats your way like driftwood. Pirates spent most of their time sailing through tropical regions where parrots were about as common as overpriced coffee in America today. Birds that bright and loud became part of the scenery. And because pirates were nothing if not opportunistic shoppers with very low impulse control settings, they bought or traded for these creatures in Caribbean markets. Parrots were cheap, colorful, and easy to transport. Also, compared to a monkey, a parrot was less likely to steal your food and more likely to insult you in your own accent, which, depending on your personality, could be a win. You start noticing something else too. This bird isn't just decoration. It moves with an intelligence that feels almost unsettling. It scans the horizon. It fluffs its feathers when the wind changes. It gives a low, rumbling chirp when the ropes creak just so. And while that might sound like a tiny detail, sailors back then paid attention to things like this. They lived in a world where nature, not technology, was the main forecast system. A bird reacting to pressure shifts or incoming storms mattered. There's even a small but persistent group of historians who argue that parrots served as early barometers with feathers. And of course, another group of historians insists that theory is nonsense because academic debate is basically a polite version of two parrots yelling at each other. Still, you can imagine it. The ship rolling gently, the parrot shifting its weight, the captain glancing at the bird more often than he glances at the compass. Maybe he trusts it. Maybe he just likes having someone nearby who doesn't ask for more rum rations. Or maybe, just maybe, the parrot gives him a sense of calm that even the ocean can't shake. And as you stand there on that imaginary deck, you get the sense that this first moment, this simple image of captain and parrot, isn't a cartoon. It's the quiet beginning of a much bigger story about how something small, feathery, and mildly judgmental became one of the most recognizable symbols of pirate lore, not through one event, but through centuries of travel, trade, superstition, storytelling, and that weird human habit of giving animals starring roles in our fantasies. You don't know it yet, but this bond between captain and bird is about to grow into a legend with wings, sometimes historically accurate, sometimes wildly embellished, and always perched somewhere between fact and folklore. For now, though, you're just here on the deck, easing into the rhythm of the waves, letting your thoughts drift as gently as the ship itself. You lean on the railing as the ship slides farther south, and the air shifts in that unmistakable way tropical air does. It goes from brisk ocean breeze to someone just wrapped you in a warm, damp beach towel. The colors around you start changing too. The water gets brighter. The sky feels bigger. Even the clouds look like they're on vacation. And you begin to understand something about pirates that history books always understate. They spent a lot of time in places that would make any modern travel influencer cry with envy. Turquoise water, palm trees, markets so full of color they look like someone turned the saturation slider past the legal limit. And tucked into these bustling ports, Nassau, Port Royal, Tortuga, you find parrots everywhere. They cling to roofs. They patrol the treetops. They scream at absolutely nothing in particular. And as you stand there absorbing the chaos, you realize the pirate captain's shoulder bird isn't some mystical, once-in-a-century discovery. It's more like the tropical equivalent of seeing a golden retriever at an American farmer's market. Adorable, familiar, and significantly louder than necessary. You wander into one of these markets in your imagination. The air smells like citrus, wood smoke, and a hint of whatever fish is being grilled 3 stalls over. Merchants shout prices, sailors shout louder prices, and parrots shout whatever chaotic noises they feel like contributing to the economy. These birds aren't rare treasures. They're part of everyday life. Bright flashes of red and green and yellow flit between branches, cages, and shoulders. You suddenly understand why pirates gave in to the temptation of bringing one aboard. If you were stuck on a wooden ship for months at a time, sweating through cotton shirts and trying to stay awake through night watches, wouldn't you be tempted by something colorful and entertaining too? And just when you think you've grasped the vibe, here comes the fun part. Parrots were trade. Real, profitable trade. Indigenous communities and local merchants had been catching and selling them long before pirates showed up. They understood bird behavior, migration patterns, nesting seasons, knowledge developed over generations, long before European ships dotted the horizon. But once Europeans arrived, parrots became one of those quirky cross-cultural commodities that passed through hands again and again, carried across oceans like portable ambassadors of tropical life. You pick up a small detail the textbooks often brush past. Many parrots ended up in Europe not because aristocrats were obsessed with exotic animals, though let's be honest, they kind of were, but because sailors needed something easy to barter. A bird that eats seeds and takes up little space? That's like the 18th century version of bringing souvenir keychains home, except these keychains talk back. People in London, Amsterdam, or Boston saw parrots as proof you'd actually traveled somewhere meaningful, like walking around with a Starbucks cup from a city no one believes you actually visited. Here's where the cold little historical twist lands. Parrots weren't the first choice. Pirates also brought monkeys, turtles, and even rare plants. But parrots survived the voyage better than most other creatures. They were hardy, adaptable, and could endure the rolling misery of months at sea without giving up. And because they mimicked sounds, sailors became convinced the birds were smarter than they actually were. Which, let's be fair, is also how people treat some coworkers. As you watch one of these markets in your mind, you see a pirate captain, not a cartoonish one, just a guy in weather-beaten clothes, stop at a stall where a cluster of parrots roost like little explosions of color. The captain pretends he's here by coincidence, but you can tell he's intrigued. He's been out at sea too long. He misses color. He misses laughter. He misses something that isn't a sailor complaining about rations or humidity. And this bird, with its shimmering feathers and unapologetically loud personality, becomes the solution he didn't know he needed. There's a particular green parrot that catches his eye. Maybe it tilts its head. Maybe it mimics a laugh. Maybe it bites the stall owner, and the captain finds that charming. Whatever the reason, the man buys it. Not for symbolism, not for the aesthetic, But because a parrot feels alive in a way long voyages often didn't, and that, strange as it sounds, is how most of these legendary pairings began. Small, impulsive choices in markets that smelled faintly of fruit and humidity. Still, when you start digging around the topic, you find that scholars have a habit of arguing over the smallest details. There's actually an ongoing debate about just how common parrots truly were among pirate crews. Some historians insist they were rare luxuries, not everyday accessories. Others argue that contemporary journals mention them enough to suggest they were fairly normal. And because academic disagreement is basically a polite sport, no one can fully agree. You get to simply observe the argument from a comfortable distance, like watching two parrots squawk while you sip imaginary lemonade. But one thing the evidence consistently supports is this. Parrots entered the pirate world through tropical trade routes, bustling ports, and sailors who never could resist a good story or a good souvenir. By the time the ship you're imagining begins to drift away from the market, the newly purchased bird is already bobbing on the captain's shoulder, getting used to the sway of the deck, ready to begin a new life that will eventually turn into mythology. And that's when it hits you. The iconic pirate and parrot image didn't start at sea at all. It started right here, on land, under palm trees, surrounded by noise and color and the kind of energy that made the Caribbean the unofficial headquarters of adventure. The shoulder, the ship, the legend, they all come later. For now, you're simply standing in a sun-drenched market, watching a tiny slice of history hop from branch to shoulder as casually as if it always belonged there. The ship pulls away and you follow it, a little wiser, a little more sun-warmed, carrying with you the knowledge that the parrot's journey into pirate lore started not with fantasy, but with geography, trade, and a marketplace filled with feathers, stories, and possibility. The ship settles back into its long, rolling rhythm, and you find yourself drifting toward the captain again, not because he's particularly charismatic, but because the parrot on his shoulder has started to preen with the kind of confidence normally reserved for people who say things like, "I'm not trying to brag, but..." And as you watch this small, feathery diva groom itself, you suddenly see something you didn't quite register before. This bird is doing more than decorating the captain's silhouette. It's broadcasting a message, not in words, not in mimicry, but in the same way someone walking into a coffee shop with a designer bag sends a subtle, silent signal to the rest of the room. A parrot on a pirate captain's shoulder? That was status. That was the 18th century version of showing up with a limited edition, impossible to find tropical accessory that whispers, "Yes, I've been places." And you have to remember, pirates didn't exactly have business cards. They didn't have LinkedIn pages. They didn't even have a reliable mailing address unless, somewhere on the ocean, probably tired counts. The reputation traveled entirely through word of mouth, tavern gossip, port rumors, and the occasional wanted poster. So anything that made a captain stand out mattered. Swords, jackets, hats, scars, boots, and yes, even parrots. Especially parrots. You watch the captain step across the deck, His boots thud, his coat sways, and there, perched like a jewel that refuses to be ignored, sits the parrot, bright, loud, and alive. The crew notices. Other captains notice. Strangers notice. And while they might not say anything out loud, the same silent chain reaction happens. This guy has been farther than most. This guy brings back trophies from places others only dream of reaching. This guy commands enough authority that even a flighty tropical bird sticks around. And because humans have always been experts at inferring meaning from vibes, a kind of mythology builds itself automatically. There's another layer to this too. One you pick up as you study the captain more closely. Parrots weren't just beautiful, they were expensive. They ate seed mixes that weren't native to Europe. They required transport. They required trade connections. Having a parrot wasn't just having a pet, it was having proof of access. Access to ports, to markets, to supplies, to people. A captain who could acquire a parrot was a captain who had influence, money, reach, momentum. And let's be honest, pirates loved showing off. This isn't speculation. It's right there in accounts of the time. They wore stolen silks, rings, embroidered coats, brightly colored sashes. If modern fashion influencers had access to the same wardrobe, they'd lose their minds. So of course, a flashy, loud, tropical bird fit right in with the overall aesthetic. A parrot was the ultimate quirky but sophisticated accessory, like wearing a Hawaiian shirt to signal that you're relaxed, but also wearing a gold watch to show you're relaxed with style. There's even a strange little historical footnote here. Some ships logged parrots as crew, belongings, not cargo. They were listed next to personal weapons, navigational tools, and rare fabrics. A pet being recorded with the same seriousness as a flintlock pistol. That tells you something about how they were regarded. And when historians point to those records, some argue this proves parrots were true markers of status. Others insist the records are inconsistent and shouldn't be overinterpreted. Scholars disagree, as they always do, using polite academic wording instead of just yelling like the parrots themselves. Still, when you picture a captain walking down a dock with a parrot riding on his shoulder, you immediately get the sense that he's someone with stories, someone with reach, someone who can command attention without even opening his mouth. And that was valuable in a world where leadership depended not just on navigation skills, but on personal charisma and the ability to maintain order among people who were one spilled drink away from starting a fistfight. The parrot becomes a symbol, not because it was meant to be, but because everything on a pirate ship had meaning. A captain's hat signaled authority. His coat signaled rank. His weapons signaled power. And the bird signaled experience, a history of faraway places, a connection to the lush, chaotic, sun-drenched world where fortunes were made and lost. And the best part? The parrot didn't even have to do much. It just had to exist, to perch, to squawk occasionally, to glare judgmentally at whoever walked by. That was enough. The bird was simultaneously a pet, a conversation starter, a reputation booster, and, let's be honest, a flex. Not an aggressive one, a casual, confident one. The kind of flex that says, "Oh, this old thing. I just picked it up after surviving a hurricane near Martinique." You feel the ship tilt again, and the captain adjusts his stance. The parrot shifts with him, feathers gleaming in the sun. And in that tiny movement, you see how naturally this pairing fits. Not because pirates needed parrots, but because parrots made captains feel like the world they conquered had left a mark on them too. And as the wind lifts the bird's feathers, you catch yourself smiling. It's such a small detail, yet it carries such an enormous weight in the tapestry of pirate lore. The shoulder bird wasn't an accident. It wasn't a cartoon invention. It was a symbol woven into the culture of seafarers who lived hard, traveled far, and wanted the world to know it. In that moment, standing on this imagined deck, it becomes clear. This parrot isn't just decoration. It's a story, one that started long before the ship you're on ever left the harbor. You settle into the rhythm of the ship again, and the days begin to stretch the way they do on long voyages, slow, wide, and a little bit shapeless, like someone pressed pause on the world and forgot to unpause it. And that's when you finally understand one of the great unspoken truths of life at sea. It gets quiet, not peaceful, meditative quiet. More like, if I hear the creak of this rope one more time, I might merge with the plank it's tied to. Quiet. The kind of quiet that eats at your patience, your sleep schedule, and occasionally your dignity. That's why, as you glance toward the captain's shoulder again, the parrot suddenly makes a whole new kind of sense. Because on a pirate ship, where you're stuck with the same 40-ish faces for months, where conversations run out faster than supplies, and where the entertainment options are stare at the ocean or stare at the slightly different part of the ocean, a loud, opinionated, occasionally chaotic bird wasn't just decoration, it was company. And not just any company. Reliable company. The kind that doesn't complain about rations, doesn't argue about navigation, doesn't ask why the rum is gone, even though we all know the answer is because the crew finished it, and doesn't threaten to start a mutiny when they get bored. You watch the bird ruffle its feathers, mutter to itself, and occasionally let out a sound that suspiciously resembles a laugh. And you realize, this creature brings life into a place that desperately needs it. You notice how the sailors keep glancing toward it, not constantly, just enough that you feel the bird is a subtle part of their daily rhythm. A small spark of color in a world of bleached rope and weathered planks. A tiny reminder that something out here is not made of salt, sweat, and exhaustion. But here's the fun part. Parrots don't just make noise. They make the right kind of noise. Mimicry, repeated sounds, rhythms that break up the monotony without overwhelming it. Imagine spending 3 weeks at sea, where every sound is the same. Waves, wind, the occasional grunt of a sailor regretting his life choices. And suddenly one morning, you hear the parrot imitate the creak of the mast or the whistle of the boatswain. Is it useful? Debatable. Is it entertaining? Absolutely. Some historians even argue that parrots helped keep morale stable during long voyages, serving as unintentional emotional support animals long before the phrase even existed. Others push back and say that's far too generous, that sailors were perfectly capable of entertaining themselves without relying on feathered stand-up comedians. And of course, like with anything historical, the debate continues with no definitive conclusion, because scholars love leaving you with the three most powerful words in academic writing. It is unclear. But whether intentional or not, the bird brings energy to the ship. You see it when the crew gathers on deck during slow afternoons. Someone tosses the parrot a seed. Someone murmurs at it. Someone laughs when it imitates the sound of the cook banging pots below deck. Even the captain, usually so composed, occasionally hides a smile when the bird decides to practice its uncanny impersonation of a squeaky hinge. Think of it this way. A parrot on a pirate ship is like having that one friend who always has a joke ready. Not necessarily a good joke, but one that distracts you from the fact that life is currently a long, humid, slightly smelly endurance test. The bird becomes the unofficial morale officer, not by choice, just by being its loud, colorful, unapologetically vibrant self. There's another layer to this too, something quieter, more subconscious. Humans are wired to respond to living things. When you're isolated in the middle of the ocean, where everything you touch is wood, rope, or salt water, a living creature feels profoundly grounding. Sailors kept cats for this reason. They kept goats and chickens for this reason. But parrots added personality. They weren't just practical, they were engaging, recognizable, almost conversational. And here's where things get particularly fascinating. Sailors often taught their parrots words or phrases, not as a joke, but as a way of hearing something familiar in a place where familiar sounds were scarce. Imagine the comfort of hearing a phrase you've heard back home, even if it's the parrot clumsily imitating it. It creates this strange little bubble of humanity on a ship filled with danger, noise, and uncertainty. Plus, and this is absolutely true, you didn't have to worry about a parrot plotting against you. The same cannot always be said for a bored pirate crew. The bird was neutral territory, a safe presence, a shared distraction. The ship groans as it hits a heavier wave, and the parrot adjusts instantly, gripping the captain's shoulder with the ease of a creature who understands balance better than most humans. You watch it shake its feathers, blink, and then let out a perfectly timed squawk that somehow cuts through the thickness of the day like a spark of absurdity. The crew doesn't react dramatically. They don't cheer. They just smile. Small, tired smiles that mean more on a ship like this than they ever would on land. And suddenly, you see it clearly. This parrot, this splash of chaotic color, wasn't brought aboard because captains needed a pet. It was there because long voyages were hard. Silence was heavy, and a little noise from an unexpected source could feel like a lifeline. The bird didn't just brighten the ship, it broke the monotony. It carried tiny threads of joy. It filled the empty spaces between conversations and made the long, gray stretches of ocean just a little less endless. And on a pirate ship, where boredom could be as dangerous as any storm, that made the parrot worth its weight in gold. you wake to the sound of canvas snapping overhead, the kind of sharp flutter that tells you the wind is ready to cooperate. For once, the ship glides forward with an ease you're not used to, and as you stretch your imagination-worn legs, you catch sight of the parrot again. Only this time, something feels different. The bird is perched not on the captain's shoulder, but on a crate being pried open by two sailors who keep glancing around in that very specific way people do when they're about to bend a rule or six. Inside the crate, you see it. Fruit, spices, and something wrapped in cloth that the sailors guard like it's the last slice of cake at a family gathering. You realize you've wandered straight into one of the most overlooked and surprisingly entertaining parts of pirate life: smuggling. But tonight, we're not talking about gold or silk or barrels of whatever passes for rum. No, you're about to see how parrots, little feathered noise machines, accidentally became part of an underground economy. Smuggling wasn't just a pirate specialty. It was practically a side hustle. Pirates didn't operate with bank accounts or payroll systems. They dealt in whatever brought profit, legally or otherwise. And tropical animals, especially birds with bright feathers and the personality of a chaotic uncle at Thanksgiving, became valuable commodities. Parrots weren't just souvenirs, they were currency. You imagine walking through a port town back in the day. A British officer asks for identification you definitely don't have. A merchant demands proof that your spices weren't acquired under questionable circumstances, which they absolutely were. But what happens if you discreetly offer him a parrot, a living, talking, exotic bird? Well, let's just say that a surprising number of problems melt away when the bribe squawks loudly enough to drown out the conversation. Here's where the economics get interesting. Parrots could be bought for very little in the Caribbean, but once they crossed the Atlantic, their price skyrocketed. Londoners adored exotic pets the same way people today adore gadgets that claim to improve sleep, but only improve your electricity bill. A single parrot could sell for the equivalent of months, sometimes years, of a sailor's wages. That made them excellent contraband. But smuggling parrots wasn't as simple as hiding bags of coins. Birds are loud. Loud in the sense that subtlety is not a word they have ever encountered. Imagine a customs officer boarding a ship to inspect the cargo hold, and suddenly a voice from inside a crate says, "Hello," in a tone that suggests it has urgent gossip. You can't exactly pretend that was the wind. That's why pirates became surprisingly creative. Some hid parrots in barrels marked as dried beans. Others kept them in the captain's quarters, where no one wanted to go, because captains are usually busy being intimidating or brooding dramatically. And some, perhaps the most cunning of all, simply let the birds roam the ship freely and acted like they were personal pets with no economic intent whatsoever. And here's the weirdest part. Some historical records actually list parrots under miscellaneous goods, right next to things like tobacco, knives, and occasionally an item simply labeled curiosity, which raises many questions but answers none. Academic debate naturally follows. Some historians claim this proves parrots were part of organized smuggling operations. Others say they were merely casual trade items. And because history loves to leave enough ambiguity to keep graduate students busy for eternity, nobody fully agrees. You notice now that the sailors handling the crate are performing a delicate ballet. One quietly feeds the parrot a piece of fruit to keep it happy. The other gently presses a cloth around it, not to hide it entirely, but to muffle the sound in case their bonus cargo gets opinionated. This, apparently, is what smuggling with feathers looks like. A mix of strategy, bribery, and wishful thinking. The captain appears, not angry, but with the resigned expression of someone who has accepted long ago that his crew will always find new ways to test the limits of legality. He doesn't stop them. He doesn't encourage them. He simply walks past, and the parrot, sensing a figure of authority, hops back onto his shoulder as if returning to its rightful throne. And suddenly, you grasp a bigger truth. Pirates didn't just keep parrots because they liked them, or because they looked good in illustrations centuries later. They kept parrots because these birds lived at the intersection of companionship, usefulness, entertainment, and profit. A parrot could brighten a voyage, charm a crew, predict weather patterns, soothe boredom, and, on the right day, buy you out of trouble. But maybe the most interesting part of this little smuggling operation is how normal it feels aboard the ship. No one is panicked. No one is whispering dramatically. It's as casual as someone tossing a mango from hand to hand, or sharpening a knife, or bragging about a storm they definitely survived better than everyone else. It's part of the rhythm. It's part of the culture. The bird flutters its wings, letting out a sound that lands somewhere between a chirp and a rude comment. The crew laughs, the crate is sealed again, and you feel the ship shift direction ever so slightly, as if adjusting its path not just toward the next port, but toward the next opportunity. And that's the irony you carry with you as you lean against the railing. The parrot, bright and loud and seemingly innocent, was sometimes more involved in pirate business than half the crew. Not intentionally, of course. Parrots don't care about smuggling. They care about snacks. Humans, on the other hand, care a great deal about profit. And when the two meet, history ends up with a few surprisingly colorful footnotes. You close your eyes as the wind picks up again, carrying with it the scent of salt and possibility. Somewhere below deck, the smuggled crate shifts, and the faintest echo of a muffled squawk rises through the planks, just enough to remind you that the ocean is full of secrets, and some of them come with feathers. The sea has settled into one of those mellow moods where the waves feel more like gentle exhale than motion, and the ship glides forward with the quiet confidence of someone who just successfully avoided all responsibilities for a day. You move across the deck, past coils of rope and sun-bleached planks, and you spot the parrot again, this time perched on the rail like it owns the entire horizon. It tilts its head, watching the crew with those bright, calculating eyes that parrots seem to have been born with, and for a moment, you swear it's listening. not just hearing sounds, listening, and that, surprisingly, was part of the appeal. You might imagine pirates as loud, rowdy, constantly shouting across the deck. But the truth? Long voyages meant long stretches of nothing. Voices grew tired. Arguments repeated themselves. Even the most rambunctious sailor eventually ran out of jokes, songs, exaggerated stories, and questionable bragging rights. That's when loneliness crept in, not the dramatic kind, more like the slow, steady version that pulls at the edges of your energy. So the parrot? The parrot became something very different from decoration or status symbol or smuggled profit. It became a creature that listened, or at least felt like it listened. You watch one of the sailors approach the bird, leaning casually against the rail. He mutters something, not loud enough for you to hear, and probably something he'd never tell another person on board. The parrot leans closer. It blinks. It makes a soft clicking sound in its throat. And for that sailor, in that moment, it's enough. Someone or something is paying attention. And in a world where privacy didn't exist, where everyone's business was everyone else's hobby, that tiny space of quiet recognition meant more than you might expect. Here's a funny twist. Historical accounts suggest that sailors often talk to their animals like confidants. Cats, dogs, goats, occasionally chickens, though chickens were notoriously bad listeners. But parrots were special. They responded, they mimicked, they gave the illusion of conversation, the illusion of relationship. You could talk to a parrot about the storm last week, or the captain's stubborn streak, or the dream you had about falling off the mast. And even if the bird didn't understand a single word, it still echoed something back. And humans are experts at reading meaning into echoes. Some scholars argue that this kind of interaction helped sailors cope with the isolation of the open ocean, functioning almost like early and extremely feathered therapeutic companions. Others insist that's over-romanticizing things, that pirates didn't need emotional support so much as distraction. Yet the truth probably sits somewhere in the middle, perched comfortably between practicality and companionship, right where the parrot tends to sit anyway. But parrots didn't just serve as willing listeners, they also acted as non-judgmental ones. Pirates were tough, sure, but they were also human. They worried, they feared storms, they doubted decisions, they missed home, or at least the idea of home. And having a living creature nearby that didn't hold grudges, didn't gossip, and didn't have an opinion about yesterday's navigational mistake was a small but meaningful comfort. Imagine lying on deck at night, staring up at stars that look close enough to grab, listening to water slap rhythmically against the hull. You're exhausted, sunburned, and a bit lonely, and the only other creature awake is a bird perched on a coil of rope. You talk. The bird murmurs back. It's a tiny exchange, but it fills the silence better than another sigh or another crewmate snoring through his latest dream. And then there's the mimicry, the part that made parrots feel uncannily present. You hear the boatswain blow a whistle, and an hour later the parrot echoes the exact pitch. You hear the captain hum a tune under his breath, and by sunset the bird repeats it back with perfect rhythm. It's weird, it's funny, and it makes everyone on board feel a little less like they're drifting through the void. One sailor sharpens his knife. The parrot copies the scraping sound. Another coughs, and the bird coughs too. Someone laughs at the impersonation. Another laughs because laughter is contagious, and suddenly the whole deck feels lighter. Even the captain, stoic, composed, probably trying very hard to appear dignified, glances at the parrot every now and then with that subtle expression of someone who has found comfort in an unexpected place. It's the kind of micro-reaction no one would admit to out loud, but everyone notices. And as the sun dips lower, staining the water orange and gold, you realize the deeper truth of why pirates kept parrots close. On a ship defined by danger, uncertainty, and the constant thrum of responsibility, a parrot brought something rare and grounding. A listening presence, a steady companion, a creature that responded when spoken to, even if the words it returned were borrowed and rearranged. It wasn't that parrots understood pirates. It was that pirates felt understood enough. The bird hops closer to you, tilts its head again, and lets out a soft, curious squawk. You almost answer it. You almost tell it about your day, your thoughts, your worries. Not because the bird has wisdom to offer, but because it feels like it's offering space, quiet, attentive space, in a world that doesn't always have enough of that. And maybe that's all the explanation you really need. You drift forward into the story, as if the deck beneath your feet has softened into a slow-moving escalator, gently carrying you deeper into this odd little corner of maritime history. By now, you've already survived dubious pirate hygiene, questionable diets, and the kind of living conditions that would make any modern cruise ship inspector faint dramatically into the ocean. And yet, you keep walking, because you're finally reaching the heart of something that shaped pirate life far more than swords or treasure did: the emotional comfort parrots gave their captains. And yes, this is where you, the imaginary honorary crew member, discover that sometimes the most fearsome leaders in history secretly needed a feathered therapist perched on their shoulder. You notice it right away. The captain stands a little taller when the parrot's around, like someone who's secretly boosted by a pep talk delivered through squawks and head tilts. You can almost feel the mood shift on the ship. The same guy who once threatened to make you mop the deck until the planks shine like the king's bald spot. Again, purely metaphorical since you're still using second-person narration, now seems calmer when that parrot ruffles its feathers against his cheek. And suddenly, the whole crew feels less like a barely controlled chaos machine, and more like a slightly dysfunctional but emotionally supported floating family. It turns out, pirates lived in a pressure cooker of constant threats: storms, disease, hunger, mutiny, and the ever-present risk of accidentally stepping on someone's prized rope coil and starting a fight about respect. Captains especially carried that burden. They held the fate of the whole ship in their hands, and history reminds you that many were just one bad week away from losing control of their crew. Having a parrot was like having an emotional anchor, something steady, warm, and living that didn't ask for impossible decisions about loot distribution. Here's your main historical point. Ships during the golden age of piracy were incredibly isolated environments with almost no privacy, no mental health support, and no days off. Captains were expected to be authoritative, emotionally stable, and unshakable at all times. And while modern leadership books talk about mindfulness or journaling, historical records show that a surprising number of pirate captains found steadiness in their animal companions, parrots included. You watch as the parrot preens itself on the captain's shoulder, doing that little head-bobbing move that parrots do when they're happy. You'd swear the captain relaxes just a little every time. It's subtle, but you notice. You always notice. Maybe that's why you've survived this long in a pirate story designed for sleeping. Now for your required quirky fact of the chapter. Some parrots on board developed their own daily routines, waking the crew before sunrise with horrifyingly cheerful chirps, wandering below deck to beg for crumbs like a feathered food critic, or sitting on the ship's figurehead during calm seas as though auditioning for the very first nautical hood ornament. There are scattered notes from sailors describing parrots acting as makeshift weather forecasters, especially when they grew suddenly quiet before storms. Are these exaggerations? Probably. Are they adorable? Absolutely. But here's where the historian eyebrow raise comes in. Scholars still argue over how intentional all this emotional support really was. Some claim that captains genuinely bonded with their parrots as companions, while others say it was more about signaling wealth or stability to the crew. There's even a theory that parrots naturally chose captains since they tended to sleep in quieter, more protected cabins. And yes, believe it or not, there are academic debates about bird loyalty in 17th century ships. Imagine getting a PhD in parrot psychology with a specialty in nautical bonding tendencies. Still, when you look closer, the emotional layer becomes obvious. You see the captain run a finger down the parrot's back during a tense moment, right before deciding whether to confront a rival ship on the horizon. The crew murmurs nervously, but the parrot stays steady, blinking slow as if saying, "Relax, dude. Think this one through." You imagine someone in the future writing a paper titled, "Did Parrots Lower Incidence of Impulsive Pirate Behavior?" And honestly, you'd read it. The real magic, though, happens at night. You see the ship quieter than usual, a sleepy ocean stretching out like a dark blue quilt. Lanterns sway, ropes creak softly, and up on the quarterdeck, the captain sits alone beneath the stars, except not entirely alone. The parrot shifts closer to him, nestled against his shoulder, feathers puffed in the cool breeze. You don't need dialogue to understand the emotional weight. The silence says everything. This is the rare moment when a pirate captain can admit, in the privacy of his own thoughts, that leadership is lonely, and the parrot, well, it breaks that loneliness. And here's the twist that makes the whole thing unexpectedly wholesome. Crews noticed. A calm, emotionally centered captain meant fewer shouting matches, fewer reckless decisions, fewer nights wondering if a mutiny was brewing like a storm cloud on the horizon. The parrot didn't just comfort the captain, it indirectly steadied the entire ship. Essentially, you're looking at the earliest documented case of workplace emotional support animals, only slightly louder, much more colorful, and infinitely more photogenic. You lean against the railing and watch this quiet ritual play out, lulled by the rhythm of the waves and the glow of moonlight brushing the ocean's surface. Somehow, knowing that even the roughest captains needed a bit of softness makes the whole pirate world feel more human and more peaceful. And before you even realize it, the story has carried you onward, gently, like the tide. The ship rocks beneath your feet like an oversized cradle, and you settle into the next stretch of the journey without even noticing the transition. It feels almost automatic now, your mind drifting, your breathing slowing, and your curiosity sharpening just enough to keep you awake as you wander deeper into the world of parrots and pirates. Tonight, you find yourself tracing the invisible boundary where superstition ends and daily reality begins. Because pirate life wasn't just ropes and rum and questionable dental decisions. It was a floating universe powered by belief. And parrots? Oh, they fit into that universe like they were born for it. You're leaning against the rail when you notice it. The way the crew glances at the captain's parrot, as if it's not just a bird, but a tiny feathery guardian with the authority to sway fate. A feathered good luck charm, perched with dignity, occasionally tilting its head like it's judging the entire ship's life choices. And honestly, on some voyages, it probably was. Here's your historical anchor for this chapter. Maritime cultures, pirates included, were famously superstitious. The ocean was unpredictable. Storms came with zero warning, and most sailors couldn't swim. Fun fact you never asked for but now can't unknow. So they placed tremendous weight on omens. Cats, dolphins, rats, odd winds, weird cloud shapes, everything meant something. Parrots, with their bright colors and uncanny intelligence, slid neatly into this belief system. Many sailors thought parrots brought protection, especially on dangerous routes through cursed waters, a phrase sailors tossed around far too casually for your comfort. The funny part? Parrots didn't do anything special. They just existed. They flapped. They chewed on rope ends. They screamed dramatically at sunrise. But somehow, that was enough to convince the crew that luck was on their side. You watch as one pirate gently taps the parrot's perch before he starts his shift, like someone knocking on wood. Another sneaks at a piece of dried fruit before climbing the rigging, as if bribing it for divine favor. You don't question it. Honestly, you respect the hustle. Now for your required quirky gem. Some records describe parrots refusing to board certain ships, meaning they simply flapped away during loading or refused to perch where expected. And according to scattered journals from sailors, this was interpreted as a cosmic warning. Entire voyages were postponed because the parrot knew something. Imagine a whole crew anxiously waiting while one stubborn bird sits on a barrel staring at them like, "Try again later." Practical? Absolutely not, but adorable without question. Of course, this all leads us straight into the historian headache zone. Experts still debate just how deep these superstitions ran. Some argue that pirates exaggerated the symbolism of parrots in later storytelling, elevating them from quirky pets to full-blown omens. Others say these beliefs were genuinely rooted in daily life, woven into the psychology of survival at sea. There's even a fringe theory suggesting parrots became symbols of good fortune because they were associated with lush, resource-rich tropical regions. You won't find everyone agreeing on this, and honestly, the academic debates probably get louder than a parrot at breakfast time. You step back and observe the whole dynamic unfold like a slow-moving tableau. The crew moving with unspoken rituals, the parrot perched higher than anyone else, and the captain taking it all in with a half-knowing smile. He doesn't fully buy into the superstition, but he's also not foolish enough to dismiss it. Pirates understood morale better than most empires ever did. And if a bird could steady a sailor's nerves before a treacherous storm or a long night watch, no one was going to argue. Night settles over the sea like a warm blanket, and lantern light spills across the deck. You climb the steps to the quarterdeck, drawn by the soft glow, and see the captain gently adjusting the parrot's perch for the night. It's a small gesture, but it carries the weight of ritual. The captain knows the crew sleeps easier when the parrot sleeps peacefully. The belief isn't logical, but it doesn't have to be. It's comforting. And sometimes comfort is the only thing keeping a ship from falling apart. You pause, breathing in the salty air, feeling the ocean hum beneath your feet. You realize these superstitions weren't about being gullible. They were about creating meaning in a world where the next wave could change everything. Parrots weren't magical. They were a symbol of stability in an unpredictable universe. Futile to historians, maybe. Essential to sailors? Definitely. The ship drifts forward under the stars, and without even noticing, you drift right along with it, carried deeper into this feathered mythology of the pirate world. Quietly, calmly, and with a sense of wonder you didn't expect to feel. You slip into the next part of the journey, almost without realizing it, like stepping from one wooden plank to another on a gently rocking deck. The rhythm of the sea is steady beneath you, and the night feels warm enough that even the stars seem to lean in closer, curious about what comes next. And what comes next is one of the most overlooked, slightly chaotic, undeniably entertaining parts of pirate life. Parrots as social glue, or in your terms, parrots as the unintentional HR department of a ship full of unpredictable adults with sharp objects. You notice it the moment you wander into the main deck, where the crew is in the middle of what looks like a casual debate, half serious, half salty, fully unnecessary, about who misplaced the last usable needle for mending sails. It's escalating fast, like all pirate disagreements do. Then, suddenly, the ship's parrot swoops in, lands on a barrel, and lets out a noise that sounds halfway between a squawk and a judgmental sigh. The entire crew freezes, not because of authority, not because of fear, but because the parrot has impeccable comedic timing. And just like that, the tension dissolves. Someone chuckles, someone else mutters about the bird, keeping an eye on things. A third person insists the parrot landed on their side of the argument, which somehow settles it completely. You stand there, watching the scene unfold with the realization that this parrot isn't just company for the captain. It's a high-functioning social buffer for everyone on board. Here's your history anchor. Pirate ships were among the earliest examples of semi-democratic workplaces, long before HR manuals or corporate wellness programs existed. Crews voted on major decisions, shared loot, and held leaders accountable. But that didn't mean harmony. Close quarters, long voyages, and stress created the perfect recipe for interpersonal chaos. Parrots, intentionally or not, became part of the crew's emotional management system. Their presence broke tension, shifted attention, injected humor, and occasionally embarrassed someone enough to stop a bad decision. Think of them as the original emotional reset buttons, except covered in feathers and suspiciously fond of shiny things. Now for your required quirky nugget. Parrots had an impressive habit of mimicking the most embarrassing phrases they overheard. Not the useful ones, not the important ones, the embarrassing ones. According to scattered sailor journals, some parrots famously repeated personal confessions, clumsy insults, misheard lyrics from sea shanties, and once, according to a very annoyed carpenter, a botched love poem someone tried to write in secret. This led to unofficial pirate lore that parrots revealed truth, which is a polite way of saying they were feathered loudspeakers exposing everyone's nonsense. Of course, this leads straight into the historian argument zone. Scholars still debate whether parrots actually influenced group dynamics, or whether their presence simply got exaggerated in later storytelling. Some argue that the birds genuinely reduced conflict by diverting attention. Others think pirates loved parrots because they symbolized exotic lands, and the social roles attributed to them were romanticized afterward. There's even a theory suggesting parrots accidentally enforced social norms by repeating habits they heard frequently. The debate has no consensus, and you can easily imagine a row of academics arguing about bird-mediated conflict resolution. The mental image is outstanding, and you treasure it quietly. Back on deck, the parrot flutters over to a group sorting ropes. You follow the bird's path and immediately notice how everyone subtly adjusts. Shoulders loosen, voices soften, movements become a touch more playful. You've seen this pattern enough times now to recognize it. The parrot isn't just a mascot. It's part of the rhythm of the ship. It's the background soundtrack. It's the reason small annoyances don't turn into broken bones or mutinies. It's the feathery equivalent of a playlist full of "everything is fine" songs. You continue exploring the deck until you reach the galley, where the cook is wrestling with a barrel of something that smells like food, only in the most optimistic sense. The parrot hops in, inspects the scene, and emits a noise so offended you can feel it in your teeth. The cook bursts into laughter, shaking his head as if the bird just delivered a 5-star restaurant review. You notice how contagious that laughter is. One by one, crew members nearby join in. Whatever stress they were carrying melts away for a moment, replaced by the simple joy of watching a parrot roast someone without using actual words. Night deepens, spreading across the ship like a soft blanket, and the lanterns begin to glow. The parrot settles near the helm, where a handful of sailors are quietly mending gear. It chirps rhythmically, almost like it's offering moral support. You lean in, listening to the low murmurs, the gentle scratching of thread through canvas, and the parrot's soothing little grunts. It feels like a communal exhale, the kind of moment that binds people together. Not through words, not through oaths, but through small, shared silences. It's in these moments that you understand the deeper truth. Pirates lived in a world where companionship was rare and trust was constantly tested. Parrots brought neutrality, simplicity, and a strange kind of emotional clarity. They didn't choose sides. They didn't argue. They didn't judge. Well, except when they definitely did, but always in a way that people found funny instead of humiliating. They softened the edges of life at sea, and you, standing among them, feel it too. The subtle shift in atmosphere, the warmth, the camaraderie. You breathe it in like cool night air. You realize that sometimes history isn't shaped by the grand gestures or the dramatic battles. Sometimes it's shaped by the quiet presence of something small, bright, and alive. Something that reminds a group of tough, tired sailors that they're still human. The ship rocks gently. The parrot fluffs its feathers, and you drift further into this warm, improbable world where a single bird can steady the spirit of an entire crew, the ocean stretches endlessly ahead, its surface catching the moonlight in sparkles that make you squint and question your own eyes. The ship moves with the calm confidence of someone who knows both the ocean's tricks and its moods, and you stroll along the deck, feeling the sway beneath your feet like a lullaby with a mischievous undertone. Tonight, your attention turns to an aspect of pirate life that's part logistical necessity, part accidental artistry. Parrots as living news feeds. And yes, this sounds absurd, but stay with me, because it's delightfully true. You notice it immediately. Parrots have an uncanny ability to repeat sounds they hear most often, which, aboard a pirate ship, meant conversations, commands, and snippets of gossip. A captain barks a warning about approaching sails, and a few hours later, the parrot squawks it back with dramatic flair, as if reminding everyone of yesterday's drama. A sailor mumbles about missing a shipment, and the bird echoes it to the crew, unintentionally spreading news faster than anyone could have anticipated. In a way, parrots became an early, feathery form of information technology. Low bandwidth, high noise, and infinitely entertaining. Here's your historical anchor. Long before newspapers or radio broadcasts were common, news traveled at the speed of mouths and waves. Sailors relied on word of mouth and any auditory clues they could pick up from other ships or ports. Parrots, often trained or at least conditioned to mimic human speech, accidentally amplified the circulation of important, trivial, and hilariously misheard information. The bird didn't care about accuracy. It cared about repetition. And on a pirate ship, repetition was practically currency. Now for your quirky little fact. Some parrots gained reputations as messenger birds, though not in the formal sense. Certain captains claimed their birds would mimic the exact orders given by the previous watch or repeat new arrival rumors in the harbor. Other parrots earned nicknames like Captain Gossip or the Winged Herald because the crew swore they repeated conversations at just the right dramatic moment to keep everyone on edge or laughing. You can't make this up, and honestly, you wouldn't want to. But of course, there's academic controversy here. Scholars still debate whether parrots truly had any meaningful role in communication, or if their chatter was purely coincidental, interpreted after the fact to fit narratives. Some insist the stories were embellished over time, turning ordinary birds into legendary ship's news anchors. Others argue that even accidental repetition had real consequences, helping crews remember orders, recount events, and maintain social cohesion during long, monotonous stretches at sea. As always, the historical record is deliciously inconclusive. Watching the deck, you see the parrot land near a cluster of sailors sorting ropes. A fragment of conversation escapes the group, about a rumored bounty in a nearby port, and immediately the bird squawks a distorted version of it. The crew pauses, glances at one another, and chuckles knowingly. They correct one another's understanding, compare with memory, and suddenly everyone's slightly more alert than before. The parrot's input hasn't just entertained. They've provided a subtle social nudge toward accuracy or chaos. It's hard to tell, really, but both are equally valuable aboard a pirate vessel. There's also the psychological effect. Repetition from a living, colorful creature makes information stick. A sailor hears a critical warning shouted across the deck. Hours later, the parrot mimics it with precision. The alert sinks in again, embedding itself into the collective consciousness of the crew. On long voyages, where forgetfulness could be disastrous, this was no small advantage. Not that anyone likely planned it that way. The parrot was too busy chewing rope ends and preening, but the benefit was real nonetheless. You notice the captain watching all this with a quiet, satisfied expression. He doesn't need to lecture or bark orders. He doesn't need to micromanage the flow of information. The parrot, in its unpredictable brilliance, accomplishes a subtle part of leadership for him. It keeps everyone aware, engaged, and slightly amused. And in the long stretches of ocean, where boredom can feel as dangerous as storms, that counts for a lot. Finally, the night settles deeper, and the wind carries the faint, salty tang of far-off land. Lanterns sway gently, casting soft circles of light on the deck, highlighting the crew as they quietly move about their tasks. The parrot hops onto the captain's shoulder for the night, feathers fluffed, eyes alert, yet calm. And you realize that this small, seemingly whimsical companion has quietly become the connective tissue of the ship, an unintended messenger, morale booster, and tiny historian in its own right. The ocean hums beneath you. The ship rocks forward, and somewhere between the rhythmic slap of water and the soft rustle of feathers, you catch the faint truth. Pirates didn't just bring parrots for show. They brought them because, in a world where information, emotion, and social order were constantly tested, a clever, noisy bird was an indispensable part of daily survival and storytelling. The night has deepened, and the ship glides silently as if the ocean itself is holding its breath, letting you drift further into the peculiar rhythm of life aboard a pirate vessel. You lean against the rail, eyes tracing the silver ripple of moonlight across the waves, and notice the parrot again, perched like a tiny monarch, its feathers catching the lantern glow in flashes of emerald and ruby. But tonight, it's not just a companion, a gossip, or a moral booster. Tonight, you're about to discover another, slightly more practical reason pirate captains kept these birds: the parrot as a tool of observation. Imagine being hundreds of miles from the nearest port, surrounded by endless blue, relying on your senses to keep the ship safe. In a world without radar, GPS, or weather apps, any edge counted. Sailors developed uncanny awareness, and the parrot, despite its small size, could amplify that awareness. Birds have acute vision and instinctively respond to changes in environment, so an agitated parrot often indicated something a human hadn't yet noticed. A sudden shift in wind, a distant ship approaching, or the telltale signs of an incoming storm. Here's your historical anchor. Accounts from 17th and 18th century ships often describe parrots squawking frantically before weather turned nasty or when a rival vessel drew near. It wasn't that the parrots had psychic powers. They were simply alert, responsive animals tuned to the natural world, a sensory supplement for the human crew. Pirates, being pragmatic opportunists, quickly realized the advantage and began observing their birds for cues. The parrot became a feathered early warning system. Now, for the quirky fact, some parrots developed remarkable habits of mimicking emergency calls they heard repeatedly. If the ship's bell rang for a storm, a parrot would later imitate the exact tone, sometimes startling new sailors into action. There's even a story of a parrot on a Caribbean pirate ship squawking a distress pattern so accurately that a captain reportedly averted a potentially disastrous grounding. You'd think the bird was auditioning for a role in naval heroics, not sitting on a pirate shoulder, and yet history hints at moments just like this. But naturally, historians argue about the reliability of these observations. Some claim these reports were exaggerations, romanticized after the fact to make pirates seem clever or magical. Others suggest parrots genuinely served as environmental indicators, and captains, ever practical, used the bird's behavior as supplemental guidance. The debate remains open, wrapped in the usual polite academic wording. Evidence is inconclusive but suggestive. You smirk, imagining a parrot earning a seat at a faculty panel. As you watch the captain glance toward his perched companion, you notice a subtle nod exchanged between man and bird, like a silent acknowledgement of teamwork. The crew goes about its tasks, adjusting sails, checking lines, and keeping an eye on the horizon. You begin to see the broader picture. The parrot isn't just decoration, status, or comic relief. It's integrated into the daily operations, a small but perceptive partner in survival. Then there's the social angle layered atop the practical one. When the parrot reacts, it prompts interaction among crew members, reinforcing group awareness. If the bird squawks suddenly, sailors check their surroundings, exchange observations, and coordinate without the captain even needing to intervene. In essence, the parrot helps maintain vigilance and cohesion, acting as both sensor and social glue. a dual-purpose marvel in feathers. And of course, like everything aboard a pirate ship, the results weren't always predictable. Some birds overreacted, causing false alarms that sent the crew into unnecessary flurries. Others ignored subtle cues entirely. Yet even failures contributed to lore, laughter, and shared memory. An accidental training tool, teaching sailors patience and observation while adding color to life at sea. You lean back, feeling the ship's gentle sway, and realize this tiny bird has quietly touched nearly every aspect of life aboard. Morale, companionship, gossip, superstition, and now practical observation. It's almost unbelievable how one feathery creature could weave into the tapestry of daily existence, filling roles no one ever anticipated. And somehow, through all of it, the parrot maintains the appearance of effortless grace, perched above the chaos, yet integral to it. By the time the wind shifts softly and the lanterns glow a warmer hue, you understand something fundamental. Pirate captains didn't keep parrots merely for flair or amusement. The birds were allies, censors, companions, and sometimes, even if history only hints, quiet little advisors perched on shoulders, guiding the ship through both the ordinary and the extraordinary. The horizon is low, blending almost imperceptibly with the dark velvet of night, and the ship drifts forward like a dream in motion. You find yourself wandering the deck with that peculiar, quiet awareness that comes after hours of watching life aboard a pirate ship. Somewhere between the rhythmic slap of water against hull and the soft creak of the timbers, you notice the parrot again, preening itself atop the mainmast railing, perfectly still, as if it's absorbing the secrets of the sea one feather at a time. And tonight, you realize, it's time to talk about the unsung role of parrots in pirate culture. Their symbolic value, particularly in projecting authority and status. You lean closer, watching the crew move about. Life is full of hierarchy and subtle social cues aboard a ship. The captain's word is law, yes, but presentation matters. Pirates weren't just thugs with swords. They were showmen in their own right, projecting strength, cunning, and sometimes absurd charisma to both crew and rivals. A parrot on the captain's shoulder became part of that display, a bright, exotic flourish that subtly reinforced the captain's presence. Here's your historical anchor. Records from the golden age of piracy mention captains keeping parrots as a visible sign of wealth or worldly experience. Exotic birds were not easily acquired, especially colorful, talkative specimens, so a parrot suggested access to distant ports and rare goods. It was essentially a living, feathered business card, and for the crew, it was also a status signal. The captain with a parrot commanded attention, curiosity, and a touch of respect, maybe even more than the cutlass at his side. And here's your quirky little fact. Some parrots were so renowned that they even received nicknames like Captain's Pride or the Squawkin' Admiral. Historical accounts describe sailors whispering about certain birds with a mix of reverence and exasperation, as if the parrot were not just a companion, but a senior officer of sorts. In one anecdote, a parrot reportedly squawked a command so convincingly that a new crew member briefly saluted it before realizing the absurdity. You can almost hear the collective laughter echo across the deck, even centuries later. Of course, scholars are still debating this. Some argue that parrots were simply pets, and their role in signaling status was a later embellishment by storytellers or illustrators. Others point out that these birds often featured in port town lore and pirate accounts, suggesting that their symbolic weight was genuine. As always, history hedges its bets with phrases like likely and it is uncertain, leaving you to imagine the nuances yourself. Watching the captain adjust the parrot's perch, you notice the subtle choreography. The bird fluffs, the crew pauses to glance. The captain tilts his head with an air of casual authority. The interplay is effortless, yet effective. The parrot becomes more than a pet. It's part of the captain's persona, a tool of influence, even if the captain would never admit it. And there's a deeper psychological layer. On long voyages, isolation wears on both leaders and followers. A captain with a visible companion, especially a clever, attentive parrot, seemed less alone and more in command. The crew sensed this, and the parrot's presence reinforced a kind of stability that went beyond words or orders. In subtle ways, it made discipline easier, loyalty easier, and sometimes even mutiny less tempting, because no one wanted to challenge a captain whose shoulder bird seemed suspiciously unimpressed. The parrot's mimicry plays into this too. A well-timed squawk or imitation of a crew member's call adds humor, lightens tension, and yet keeps everyone aware that the captain's attention, feathered or otherwise, is always near. The bird is simultaneously entertaining and commanding, bridging gaps in authority with charisma no human could replicate alone. You step back, letting the wind and waves wash over you. The lanterns cast soft light on the ship's surfaces, highlighting ropes, barrels, and the occasional wandering sailor. The parrot shifts slightly, as if acknowledging your presence too, then tilts its head toward the horizon. You can't help but feel the resonance of its role. Part companion, part status symbol, part unspoken sentinel of the ship's social order. In the quiet hum of the ocean night, it becomes clear that pirate life was as much about perception as action. And in that mix, the parrot, bright, loud, unpredictable, was a surprisingly effective instrument, guiding morale, signaling authority, and shaping how the captain and crew were perceived, both by each other and by the vast, watchful ocean. The ship glides forward through the ink-dark water, the gentle sway underfoot like a heartbeat echoing through the night. Lanterns hang low, casting warm pools of light that highlight the textures of rope, wood, and scattered tools. You walk slowly, taking in the rhythm of life aboard a pirate ship, and your eyes keep returning to the parrot perched elegantly on the captain's shoulder. Tonight, your focus shifts to one of the strangest, most unexpectedly practical aspects of parrots: their role in daily navigation and routine aboard the ship. Yes, parrots were part of the operational heartbeat, whether anyone realized it or not. Picture it: the deck alive with motion, sailors checking ropes, adjusting sails, and scanning the horizon. The captain stands at the helm, relying on subtle cues, wind shifts, and experience to guide the ship. And somewhere in that mix, the parrot sits, squawking occasionally, mimicking commands, and repeating phrases it's heard from officers over and over. Those repeated phrases, whether it's steady on the helm or reef the sails, create a second layer of communication, reinforcing the chain of orders across the noisy deck. It's like having an extra pair of ears, a live reminder, or an accidental auditory reinforcement system. Here's your historical anchor: records from the Caribbean during the golden age of piracy note parrots mimicking bell signals, whistle calls, and shouted orders, often perfectly timing their squawks with important actions. Crew members sometimes remarked that these feathered companions helped them remember and respond to repetitive commands, especially during long shifts or when fatigue dulled attention. Parrots weren't formal tools, of course, but they were surprisingly effective in creating continuity and rhythm on board. Now for your peculiar fact. Some parrots were reported to develop preferences for certain types of commands, responding only to specific phrases or voices. One account details a bird that would mimic the lookout's warning squawks, but ignore the cook's routine calls, leading to curious misunderstandings and occasional bursts of laughter. And yes, it's documented that some birds apparently refused to participate, sitting in silent judgment while the crew scrambled, a tiny, feathery display of passive resistance. Unsurprisingly, historians still debate the practicality of parrots in navigation and routine. Some insist these stories are embellished, turning playful mimicry into functional legend. Others suggest that even accidental reinforcement of auditory cues had subtle but meaningful benefits, particularly for fatigued or distracted crews. There's also speculation that parrots could sense environmental changes, wind shifts, subtle noises in rigging, and react in ways that indirectly alerted the crew. The evidence is anecdotal, but intriguing. You watch as a sailor tosses a rope overboard to check the line, and the parrot immediately mimics the command shouted minutes earlier. The crew member pauses, startled at first, then laughs, realizing the repetition helps him catch an error in technique. Small moments like these, repeated daily, become a rhythm, a pattern that ties the crew's work together with humor, efficiency, and subtle guidance. Parrots also played an unexpected psychological role in routine. Monotony at sea was brutal. Long stretches of endless ocean could dull attention and fray tempers. The bird's unpredictability, squawking at the wrong moment, imitating someone's sneeze, or echoing a misheard order, introduced small bursts of surprise and amusement. Those tiny interruptions weren't just entertainment. They kept minds alert and crews engaged, turning mundane tasks into interactive exercises in observation and adaptability. You pause near the railing, listening to the faint slap of waves against the hull, the low murmur of sailors at work, and the parrot's occasional squawk, perfectly timed, perfectly human-like in its delivery. You begin to appreciate how, over time, this living, squawking, mischievous companion became a small but integral part of shipboard life. It wasn't just a pet, a symbol, or a status marker. It was, unintentionally, part of the operational rhythm. By the time the stars begin to fade in the early pre-dawn sky, you realize that pirate ships weren't just vessels for treasure. They were floating ecosystems where humans and animals, chaos and order, seriousness and humor, all blended together. And at the center of this ecosystem, the parrot quietly held a role that was more essential than most passengers, or even historians, might ever fully credit. The night has thinned into the soft, silver haze of early morning, and the ocean feels almost liquid velvet beneath the ship. You step carefully across the deck, letting the gentle rocking guide your pace, and notice the parrot perched near the captain, its bright feathers glowing softly in the lantern light. By now, you've seen this bird play the role of companion, social mediator, status symbol, news broadcaster, and even accidental operational assistant. Tonight, your focus shifts toward the more subtle and unusual purpose of these feathered companions: emotional contagion and morale. You watch as the crew goes about their chores with quiet efficiency. The ship hums with low-level activity, ropes creaking and sails whispering in the wind. Then, without warning, the parrot emits a series of loud, playful squawks, some deliberately mimicry, others entirely spontaneous. Instantly, a ripple runs through the crew. Laughter bubbles up from one corner. A sailor shakes his head at the bird's audacity. Another pauses mid-task with a small grin. The atmosphere lifts. The shift is almost imperceptible, but undeniable. The bird is a conduit for energy, injecting joy into long, monotonous hours at sea. Here's your historical anchor. Several ship logs from the Caribbean indicate that parrots had a notable effect on morale. Sailors frequently noted that a well-timed squawk or mimicry of a humorous phrase could break tension, reduce conflict, and even help stave off the creeping lethargy of endless ocean days. A pirate ship was a pressure cooker. Fatigue, boredom, and stress were constant threats. A parrot, an unpredictable, colorful living presence, helped regulate the emotional temperature. Your quirky fact: some parrots reportedly developed a repertoire of favorite crew members to cheer up. One journal describes a parrot squawking exaggerated imitations of a grumpy mate's voice whenever he appeared downcast, effectively giving him a laugh at his own expense. Another bird would mimic a cheerfully sung sea shanty only for the cook, who had the misfortune of being notoriously glum before meals. These birds were not therapists in any formal sense, yet their actions resembled a kind of intuitive, emotional intelligence. And, as always, historians debate the extent of the effect. Some argue that the accounts are anecdotal, exaggerated by later storytellers eager to romanticize pirate life. Others suggest that parrots' mimicry and playful behavior genuinely influenced crew morale, offering a practical, if unconventional, method of stress relief. Scholars remain divided, hedging their conclusions with cautious phrasing, leaving room for imagination as you picture the interactions. You walk past a group of sailors hauling ropes, each quietly noting the parrot's squawk mid-task. They glance at one another, smiling slightly, before resuming their work. The bird has altered the emotional tempo without saying a single meaningful word. And the captain? He observes quietly, an almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, knowing the small shift in energy carries weight over long stretches at sea. You notice another pattern. Parrots encouraged micro-rituals. Crew members would pause to acknowledge a squawk, exchange a joke, or mimic it themselves. These small acts of interaction subtly reinforced cohesion, helping maintain social harmony in an environment where disputes could escalate quickly. The bird, unwittingly, had become a stabilizing agent, smoothing over friction before it became friction. By the time dawn tints the horizon a pale coral, the ship feels a little lighter, the crew a little more alert, and the endless expanse of ocean slightly less daunting. The parrot preens, fluffs its feathers, and settles into a quiet watch over the deck, an ever-present reminder that humor, joy, and emotional connection are as essential to survival as sails, rigging, and strategy. And as you pause, breathing in the cool, salty air, you realize something remarkable. In a world dominated by danger and uncertainty, pirates discovered, intentionally or not, that a small, lively companion could amplify courage, patience, and resilience. A feathered beacon of morale perched proudly on the shoulder of one of history's most unpredictable leaders. The sun hovers just above the horizon, casting long golden reflections across the waves that make the ocean shimmer like liquid fire. You step lightly along the deck, the gentle sway of the ship lulling your senses into that perfectly relaxed state, and you notice the parrot perched high on the captain's shoulder, preening with serene authority. By now, you understand that this bird is no mere pet or ornament. It is the silent witness, the emotional anchor, and sometimes even the inadvertent strategist of life at sea. And tonight, your journey brings you to the culmination of everything you've observed. The enduring legacy of the pirate parrot. You see, pirates sailed a world of extremes. There were moments of raucous revelry, tense confrontation, and monotonous stretches where the horizon seemed endless and hope fragile. In all of this, the parrot endured, not just surviving the journey, but shaping it. It provided comfort, laughter, companionship, and even practical guidance. A pirate's life may have been unpredictable, dangerous, and exhausting, but the presence of a parrot, vivid, lively, and endlessly curious, offered a sense of continuity, a thread tying each day to the next, weaving a kind of order through the chaos. Here's your historical anchor. Parrots were more than exotic pets for the wealthy or curious captains. They were integrated into daily life. Ship logs and anecdotal accounts describe parrots mimicking commands, squawking warnings, repeating gossip, and interacting with the crew in ways that influenced mood, social cohesion, and even operational awareness. They were companions that were as practically useful as they were colorful and entertaining. The feathered crew member was, in many ways, indispensable. And of course, there's the quirky angle. Some parrots became legends in their own right. Sailors recounted stories of birds who could imitate multiple voices, mimic complex sequences of commands, or predict weather changes. Others gained reputations for mischief, exposing secrets, or delivering comic timing so perfect it rivaled the best trained performer. These tales, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes documented, made parrots into figures larger than life, symbols of the unpredictability and cleverness that defined pirate culture itself. As you watch the captain adjusting the parrot's perch one final time before the day begins, you notice the subtle exchange, the trust, the familiarity, the unspoken communication built over countless voyages. It's a small moment, easy to overlook, yet profound. The bird's presence has shaped relationships, behaviors, and even the decisions of a ship's leadership. It has been a stabilizing, comforting, and sometimes mischievous force, a companion in a world where trust and stability were as rare as treasure. Naturally, historians still debate exactly how significant parrots were in the daily operations of pirate ships. Some argue their influence has been romanticized, blown up by stories to make pirate life more charming than it actually was. Others suggest the emotional, social, and even practical roles of these birds were genuine, pointing to repeated mentions in logs, letters, and diaries. As with much in history, the truth probably lies somewhere in between. Parrots were neither omnipotent nor trivial, but something delightfully in the middle. You wander to the bow, feeling the sea breeze on your face and listening to the soft slap of water against the hull. The parrot hops lightly from shoulder to railing, watching the waves as if scanning for danger or simply appreciating the beauty of the morning. You realize that, in a way, the story of the pirate parrot mirrors the story of life at sea itself. Unpredictable, vibrant, occasionally chaotic, but enriched by small, persistent sources of companionship and joy. And as you take one final look at the deck, the crew, and the bright-eyed bird that has silently guided so much of the journey, you feel a gentle sense of closure. The parrots of history were more than a curious detail. They were participants in an extraordinary, dangerous, and surprisingly tender world, reminding pirates that life at sea, even at its most unpredictable, could still contain moments of connection, humor, and warmth. Tonight, let the world be a little gentler, and may your dreams be long and sweet. Good night.